Hello, African. Welcome to a special edition of the 1000 African Voices program. Today we are joined by Emmanuel Yegon, and the listeners of this show will remember Emmanuel as one of our 1000 African Voices. Hi, Emmanuel.
Hi, Avhurengwi. How are you doing?
Oh, doing really well. How is Nairobi today?
Nairobi is doing fine. It's just a little bit cold, but everything is okay. How's Johannesburg?
Same. It's really the same. But I must say it is improving a bit. We're now going into August, so it has started to be a bit windy, but it is still fairly cold. Emmanuel, we spoke to you in November 2018. You were our 38th voice, and your episode was so well received, and you left this long-lasting impact on not only myself as the host of this show, but on most of our listeners. So we thought it would be great to just check in with you and maybe do the show a bit differently with you this time asking the questions, and I'll do my best to then respond to the questions that you may have.
Interesting. Yeah, I have just been looking at 1000 African Voices and what you guys do, and I'm aware right now you are at the 79th voice, if I'm not wrong.
We are just over 70. I lose track as well myself. So we've done the current episode as we're doing this recording is the 72nd, Ntokozo Mbambo, the South African multi-award winning gospel singer.
All right, fine. So I was just interested in knowing a little bit more about 1000 African Voices. So probably we begin with just you telling us what is the idea behind this entire project? When was it born? Why was it born? And by whom? Who are the people? Who are the faces behind 1000 African Voices?
So yeah, it's more the voices. So sometime in October 2017, we're almost approaching 2 years. I started thinking about an African podcast, or a podcast that is quintessentially African. So the reason for that was I like listening to podcasts, but I realized that a lot of the content I was listening to is, I would say 99% or even more, American, and I struggled to find enough African content. So we decided that instead of waiting for someone to create a podcast that focuses on Africa, why not just do it ourselves? And that's when 1000 African Voices was born. So our very first episode was in November 2017.
Whom do you want to be part of these 1000 African Voices? Is it only for celebrities and people like that? I mean, who is the target?
So there's the target guest and the target listener. 1000 African Voices, as you can imagine, it's a lot of voices. So when we started off, or how we got to 1000, we thought, Africa has about 1 billion people, give or take. What if we could interview a voice, at least one voice from every single state? But obviously, if you do that only once, it only gets you to about 54 voices. The voices that we target, it's not necessarily celebrities, but we find that celebrities are ironically easily accessible because their information is publicly available. So if I wanted to speak to someone in Ethiopia who's not a celebrity, it will be difficult for me first to know who the person is, and secondly, to get the contact details of that person. So by accident, really, we then end up talking more to public faces, but that is not by design. And in terms of the target audience, it's really Africans who are interested in understanding their own continent, so that we can start connecting the different states that we have to create this idea of one Africa.
Talking about the idea of one Africa, could you now probably expound that in terms of the vision that you have for Africa as the people behind 1,000 African Voices, and perhaps by extension, this entire concept of 1,000 African Voices? What is the vision that you guys have for Africa?
So the vision is really to, when you think of how Africa was created in its current form, you'll have to go back to the 19th century when Africa was colonized or divided into your Anglo-African, those are your English-speaking countries. France took a portion. The Portuguese also had their portion, albeit a bit smaller than the French and the English. And because of that, you then ended up with a divided Africa. I mean, even now you talk about sub-Saharan Africa and North Africa as if the northern part is not really part of the continent. But even within sub-Saharan Africa, you still have to deal with countries that are culturally and politically different. And by that I mean, if DR Congo, or the Democratic Republic of Congo, is a former French colony, we find that the people there view themselves as being different from an English-speaking country, i.e. Botswana or Zimbabwe. So the whole vision behind 1,000 African Voices is to see how we can erase those, in my view, artificial, politically motivated boundaries, so that we end up with some level of a united Africa that, yes, there'll be subcultures, but those cultures really should not be on whether you're French-speaking or English-speaking, because after all, this is Africa. We should be united beyond just the languages that we speak, because culturally it's really difficult to separate Kenya from Tanzania, because we're really the same people, or at least that's my view, and that's really our vision, to say, yes, you're from Kenya, but you could easily have been from Malawi and Tanzania and Botswana, so that over time, hopefully, we'll start considering ourselves as one, and through that unity, we can then start really progressing Africa.
That's wonderful, Avhurengwi. Perhaps then now, can you kindly speak to how you are able to reach out and connect to these public voices or these people across the continent? How have you been, what would you say is the distribution so far in the 72 or so voices that you've already interviewed? What is the distribution? Are they mostly from East Africa, South Africa, West Africa? Which part is more represented than the other, and how are you then working to ensure that you reach even more other voices so that at least most of the continent is represented?
That's such a great question. So by default, and I think it's because the podcast is also hosted on Channel Africa, which is a station of the South African Broadcasting Corporation. So by default, you then end up with most of the voices being South African. But if you look beyond that and you now go into other African countries, we find that we've had a lot of success in your part of the world, Emmanuel, specifically. In Kenya, we've had yourself, we've had Emmy, we've had Njeri. I mean, the very first voice that we had in November 2017, Evita Situma, Kenyan by birth. So in Kenya, we've really made great progress. But following Kenya will be Nigeria. But for whatever reason, the quality, because we do our shows using digital means, so the audio quality from Nairobi is 10 times greater than anywhere else. But if I were to rank, it will be Kenya, Nigeria, Ghana. Those will be the main countries that we tend to focus on. But we've really touched on a lot of countries, and I've lost count. But we've done, I would guess, about 28. So we still have some way to go. As to how we reach out to our guests, we use social media. So if I give you an example, one of the more recent voices, Ntokozo Mbambo, the South African gospel artist, you'll go on to her social media page, and you reach out. If you're lucky, you get an email address, and then we send a very detailed email asking if they would like to form part of this exciting project. And I would like to think it is difficult to not want to contribute to the progression of Africa. So we use social media means to reach out, but we find in countries where data is cheap or cheaper, our show is well received because it's podcasting. So if you're in a country that charges a lot more for data, we are less likely to make progress. But Kenya has been really great, so much so that in 2018, we traveled to Kenya to interview Emmy Ochieng in Nairobi, just to say thank you to the people of Kenya for supporting us.
I think that's interesting. What would you say is the reach? Now, talking about the metrics, what is the listenership like for these programs? Or it also depends now on, like you said, internet issues in the countries of reception?
Yeah, it depends on many things. So as I'm talking to you, I'm going to go to the stats page. The page that I'm looking at is one platform. So I'm going to go into the 1000 African Voices platform. And within that, we are able to see who's listening to the show from which part of the world.
Yeah.
So I'll need to go into the Apple Podcast platform. I'll have to go into Podbean, Stitcher, before even coming back to 1000africanvoices.com. But in addition to that, Channel Africa is an internet radio station. So you've got people listening to the show from the Channel Africa side. So the total number of our listener becomes an amalgamation of all the different platforms that we have. Although the primary platform is the 1000africanvoices.com platform, where I'm able to see that the show is growing in Australia, China, Niger, Nigeria. So I do have those numbers, but giving you absolute figures would be misleading because there are many other platforms where we are hosted.
Okay, no problem. At least it's good to hear that even people outside the continent are also tuning in to just listen to these African voices. Maybe as we wind up, Avhurengwi, is that at Mobile Journalism Africa, the organization that I co-founded with friends here in Nairobi, what we say is that we want to change how the African narrative is told, because we believe that our stories are best told by us. What is the possibility of issues to do with like partnerships with such setups? For instance, now Mobile Journalism Africa, there are other initiatives like those ones across the continent, and young people who are trying to just air out their voices and just speak truth to power, hold leaders accountable. How are you trying to reach out to form partnerships with these organizations to just ensure that we change? We just change how narratives are told in Africa so that we are doing stories of Africa by Africans for Africa.
That's such a lovely question, and also a meaningful question in many ways. Because when you think of, and I'll go back to the colonization of the continent, where divisions were created, and for whatever reason we have chosen to sustain or maintain those divisions. The one thing, in my view, where Africa lacks is when it comes to cooperation. So if I'm the president of this country, I will take care of my needs within my border and not really worry too much about my neighbor. And that's an issue. So as 1000 African Voices, we are one podcast. Yes, you can reach as many listeners as possible across the continent, but the only way to spread this message of unity that you and I want to spread is through partnerships. And I'm constantly, before this recording, I was texting one of our social media friends saying, hey, do you want to partner on this initiative? So you'd know July is this Nelson Mandela Day, and then it sort of becomes the Nelson Mandela Month. And what is called for there is progress through collaboration. So when I think of the work that you do, Emmanuel, specifically, in mobile journalism, between that and 1000 African Voices as a podcast, there must be a way to find synergies where you're still able to tell stories through mobile journalism, and we are able to tell stories through podcasting, but maybe somewhere in between, when you take the two and you put them together, not only do you have two technologies that are put together to progress one idea, but you suddenly have a South African podcast producer partnering with yourself from Nairobi. Now, instead of reaching just 50 million people in Kenya, you immediately have access to 100 million people, for instance. So we are always looking for opportunities to partner, but so far, I can't say we have been successful in launching a sustainable project, but I am personally constantly looking for opportunities to do exactly that.
Okay, thank you so much, Avhurengwi. So now, finally, how do people get to listen to these voices? I am aware of the WordPress platform, 1000africanvoices.com. So kindly tell us how else people can be able to, one, listen to these voices, and then to people in those different countries, how can they be able to participate if they want to? So give us, including your social media handles, if possible.
Okay. So on 1000africanvoices.com, if you go there, you can listen to the very first voice, Evita Situma, to the very last voice, and Tokozo Mbambo, as of this recording. And those voices will always be on the 1000africanvoices.com platform. However, those that have either an iPhone or they have access to the Apple Podcast platform, you just type in 1000 African Voices and you'll be able to listen to the episodes. And you can do the same on the Stitcher.com platform, Podbean, and really whatever podcasting platform you prefer. But additionally, if you want to listen to the show with other people at the same time, the best way to do that is to go on to channelafrica.org, a radio station of the South African Broadcasting Corporation. Because it is an internet radio station, you can log into the channel every Thursday morning, 8 a.m. Central African time. I think that's 1 hour behind Nairobi time, Emmanuel. And you'll catch repeats of the same episodes on Saturday and Sunday at 9 a.m., also Central African time. So those are the few ways you can listen to the show. But in addition to listening to the show, just going back to the question you asked earlier on how or whether we want to only focus on celebrities and how we get our guests, if someone is listening to this show right now and they've got a story to share, go on to 1000africanvoices.com, go on to the contact page, include your details, a bit of a brief of your story, and I can assure you that our scheduling manager, Mr. Jones Maleka, will reach out to you. The other option is to send Jones an email. You can reach him on jonesmaleka jonesmaleka@gmail.com or jonesmaleka@yahoo.com. We are always looking for voices, especially from the countries that we have not been fortunate enough to cover up to now. So, Emmanuel, those are the different platforms, and we're really encouraging people to reach out to us so that we can finally cover the 54 states across our continent.
Thank you so much. There you go, Africa. That is Avhurengwi Ngovela of 1000 African Voices, and we've had an interesting conversation about Africa and the voices that we want to build, the Africa that we all desire. So check out Africa, 1000africanvoices.com. You listen into those voices, and you can also be part of the 1000 African Voices. Like we say at Mobile Journalism Africa, our stories are best told by us. So let's go out there and tell our stories ourselves. Thank you so much, Avhurengwi Ngovela, for your time. tonight.
No, thank you, Emmanuel. And perhaps before you go, maybe just tell us a bit, just to remind
Yeah.
our listeners about the mobile journalism work that you do. How can people reach out to you? How do we get in touch?
Okay. At Mobile Journalism Africa, we are a growing team of young storytellers who are using the easily available tool, which is the smartphone, to tell stories. For us, the smartphone is what we call a pocket studio, because with it you can do everything that the conventional newsroom can do. So these pocket studios or digital newsrooms that we have are the next frontier in storytelling. So we are offering training here in Kenya, and we were lucky to participate in a training in Accra, Ghana last year, around December, on also mobile journalism. Actually, today we just received results of a Thomson's Foundation competition that we were participating in. We are lucky to be among the 6 finalist teams in the competition. And what we are doing is to just enable more and more young people to tell stories from their locations, from that village, that remote village in some part in all these countries in Africa, to be able to tell stories using their phones. And we are looking into a future where we'll be able to collect all these stories from these different parts of Africa and publish them on our platform, www.mobilejournalism.co.ke. You can also find us on Facebook at Mobile Journalism Africa, on Instagram, Mobile Journalism Africa, and also on Twitter at Mojo_Africa. If you want to participate, if you're a storyteller and you want to, be part of this team, you can always reach out to us via our DMs. They are always open on all our social media platforms, and also info@mobilejournalism.co.ke. And you can also reach out to me via my Twitter handle at Yegon Emmanuel _ or my email yegon@mobilejournalism.co.ke.
No, thank you for that, Emmanuel. As you're talking now, I'm on the mobilejournalism.co.ke website. For starters, it's such a beautiful website. But secondly, and more importantly, the content that you have created since you started with the project is really impressive. And it's a great sign for what can be done within the African continent when its sons and daughters stand up to do something about it, so to speak, so that we can create the change that we want to see. So, Emmanuel, as always, let's keep in touch, and I would continue to wish you all the best in growing mobile journalism, not only in Kenya, but across Africa. And I am taking on the challenge that you have put forward for us to create more partnerships across the continent, to collaborate more on ideas, because it is only through that we can reach as many listeners and impact as many people as we can. So, yeah, Emmanuel, you have become a friend and partner of 1,000 African Voices, and for that I am grateful.
All right, I'm equally excited here, and I am looking forward to really what more we can do, because this is our continent, this is home, and there is no one else who will retell Africa. No one else who will tell Africa better than we can. We have to constantly work towards retelling our narrative. It just has to begin somewhere, and this is the generation that is going to do that.
And you had all of that from Emmanuel Yegon, mobilejournalism.co.ke. He considers and is widely recognized as a certified storyteller. So from the both of us, we wish you, Africa, the very best of times. Let's collaborate. Let's continue to progress our continent, because, yes, Emmanuel, you are right. It is only through us that there will be progress. So from 1000africanvoices.com and mobilejournalism.co.ke, take care, Africa. And to my East African friends, Kungana Africa, and take care.